Hey there, everyone. I want to welcome you back to the Shugyo podcast. And this is an extremely special conversation that we're going to be having today. And it's going to be a conversation of history, a conversation where we step into some Japanese culture and some wonder and amazement, artistry, and just something that I think every listener is going to find just extremely phenomenal. It is like, yeah, we're gonna get into it here, but the topic that we're gonna be speaking about today is the Kominka, and there's nobody better to have in this conversation than my friends Kunito-san and Andrea from the Kominka Collective. So, both of you, I want to welcome you to the Shugyo podcast. I want to welcome you also to the friendship that we've been able to have together over the last, since my last trip to Japan. So, welcome to this conversation.
Well, thank you very, very much for your very warm welcome and introduction. And we're really delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So, this is going to be a new topic, I would imagine, for many of the listeners here. If you wouldn't mind, let's begin by sharing a little bit about Kominka and its origin and what it is, and what's that sort of baseline understanding that we should have before we go into the deeper conversation, and why it's almost like an endangered species and something that really needs to be protected, which is the work that you're doing. And we can go deep here, but let's start off with kind of defining it, helping us understand its uniqueness.
Okay, we'd be delighted. Well, Kominka, I think when we translate the word into English, it sort of comes out as a Japanese folk house. And if I might just note that across Japan, it's quite interesting, I think, because depending on the area, whether or not, for example, there's heavy snow load or, sort of the terrain, and also the use of the house, whether it's going to be, for example, uh, used as in a fishing village or used in a mountainous area. They have different shapes and different styles, different roof pitches. And interestingly, I think the word Kominka or the definition of Kominka it sort of varies among users to a certain extent, but I think perhaps rather widely agreed definition would be a structure that was built using traditional Japanese joinery more than 50 years ago or before the Second World War. And there's various reasons for that. Uh, and to be honest, I'm a bit ashamed to say that I'm not quite sure, or I think we're not quite sure what the oldest kominka or structure that would be termed a kominka actually is. But certainly we know of kominka that are 350 or more years old, and then conversely also there's kominka that are much newer as well.
We have other cultures through history, of course, have used joinery in their construction and carpentry. What makes the Kominka of Japanese origin so unique and just so wonderful?
Well, I think that traditionally metal hardware, metal fasteners were
Mm.
not used. And so the joinery, which in Japanese is called shiguchi, is where the wood fits together, the joints fit together in kind of a, almost sort of well, I think it is artistry, almost kind of a puzzle. And then this means that both in the assembly, which is, I'll probably repeatedly use the word artistry because it really is artistry. And then also in disassembly, the buildings, the structures, the frames could be fit together. And for example, each piece of wood, when a kominka is disassembled, each piece of wood is numbered, and so then when the structure is when the frame is reassembled, it means that every place, every piece of wood, every beam, every post, has a already decided place to go. Um, so I think that that's perhaps something quite unique. I may be going off on a little bit of a different direction here, but I think many people find it really sort of ironic and very, very saddening and shocking that I think maybe about 4 years ago, UNESCO listed Japanese traditional woodworking and building arts as an intangible cultural heritage,
Mm.
because of the artistry with which these extraordinary structures are created and built, and yet they're being torn down. And I'm sure this is something we're going to be talking about, but they're being torn down and destroyed at a really, really alarming rate. And then, of course, not only are the beautiful beams and incredible old wood is just completely wasted, but also the artistry of how they were actually put together, that also disappears, along with the sort of a knock-on effect is that as these old buildings are destroyed, or and also not being rebuilt again in that fashion, then it means that the really incredible skills that go into creating such structures, that the passing on of that knowledge, of that built cultural heritage, is also at risk of being lost.
Wow, that's a lot. An intangible uh, uh,
Cultural heritage, yes.
cultural heritage. Wow.
Mm.
So
Mm.
one of the things, something that's very interesting to me is that the Kominka. Would you agree that it is almost when someone thinks about from anywhere in the world, thinks
Mm.
about if I were to say to anyone traditional Japanese architecture,
Mm.
then somehow, some way, a Kominka or Kominka style is what sort of what that impression is. Would you say that it is very much the overarching Japanese cultural architecture or architectural design that so much of Japanese modern architecture sprung from? Would that be accurate to say, or is there
Mm.
something else there that I don't see?
Um, I'm not sure that Kunito can perhaps answer this better than I can. I'm sure he can, but I think something that we're very involved in the preservation and protection efforts initiatives here in Japan, and so sort of sort of the more architectural history. I think there are other people that could speak to that much more articulately and with a greater authority, certainly than we can. I think that oftentimes when we think, the image that maybe many of us have of a traditional Japanese building or Japanese home, sort of, for example, the gasho zukuri, the thatched roof structures,
Yeah.
such as the ones that are found in Shirakawa-go, which is a World Heritage Site. Those are kominka. They're a certain kind of kominka, and maybe the kind that maybe many of us are very familiar with. But I think, and again, I'm not the person to be talking about this, but I think that kominka also share, when we think of a temple or we think of a shrine and that kind of traditional joinery. Mm,
Kominka is in Japanese old folk house, and there are many buildings in Japan. That's for example, the tea ceremony room or sukiya zukuri. That's a very expensive residential house for the wealthy people, and the a temple or shrine. There are many kinds, but Minka is folk house, the people's residential house for farmers or machiya and village people. So that's the point of the Kominka.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I understand. I think really what my question is based or centered in a concern that if this if this style disappears, then almost so much of the beauty and splendor of the unique Japanese folk art of buildings is
Mm.
gone with it. And I was
Yes.
wondering, I think my question really was, is this something that we in the West look to and just assume that a Japanese design and the beauty in that of just a massive beam out of just kind of like it
Right.
looks so out of place but yet so naturally perfect when it's
Yeah.
done, and this is
Yes.
something that you see all throughout different areas of Japanese art, even like the tokonomo in a home. Like it's just
Yes.
it's so standout, and it's something that we see a very, at least from my very very small experience in seeing these kominka that you took me around and you showed me, that it was just very profound to see these massive timbers being used, and it's so uh, like obvious, and it seems at first like you're just wowed by it, but then you're like, no, that's absolutely spectacular. And this is I wonder if I think maybe there's a concern in me that with the loss, and maybe we'll move into in a minute here the rapid rate of the loss of these beautiful buildings, if that whole kind of that whole part of the culture and design disappears with it, and that would be a very tragic thing, which I think is all of the work that you're doing is dedicated towards. So yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And
so
you're
let's
talking.
talk.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, let's dig into some numbers here, because when we were together, I learned that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are an estimated, and nobody really knows from what I understand, but the best guess is 800,000 existing Komenka.
Yes.
And so we can get sort of a landscape view. And those involve buildings that are pre World War II and go back to about 350 years.
Right.
And they're disappearing and being torn down at a rate of about 10% per year. Would you
Mm.
say that's accurate?
I think it's. Yeah, I would say that's accurate. It's hard to know, as
Yeah.
I think an issue is that research, for example, research. Excuse me. uh, the government carried out a study, or I believe it was the government that carried out a study that found that between 2008 and 2013, I believe 15%, I may be a percentage point high or low there, of Kominga were lost, were destroyed. And a real issue now is that, it's widely accepted that Kominga are being destroyed at a very rapid rate. But because at the government level, at least, research isn't being carried out and certainly isn't being published, uh, that really lets us know exactly how many Kominka are remaining. And, considering, for example, how many Kominka are destroyed every year, the number that that you just gave, I think that that's a widely agreed upon number. But another issue is that it's rather difficult to actually know. There may be Kominka that are destroyed that are not known, uh, and so it's sort of difficult, I think, in a sense, to uh, create momentum behind the preservation and protection of Kominga, even though there certainly is a great deal of momentum, across the country and even worldwide, and certainly a great deal of interest. But, an issue is that without having that kind of data in place, without knowing the numbers, it becomes sort of an invisible issue, even though, for example, in our area, when we drive around, when we walk around, we do see Kominka being destroyed all the time. And because also, of course, because of the work that we're involved in, it's something that it's really kind of within our orbit, or, under our radar. But I think it is an issue that even though there's an awareness certainly in Japan that these beautiful, extraordinary old buildings are being destroyed, and there is an appreciation certainly of Kominga in Japan. I don't think that there's a sense of urgency necessarily because of the lack of data.
Kunito-san,
Yep.
people may be wondering, well, why are they being torn down if they're such beautiful buildings and if they're so culturally important as they are, to the point where they're recognized as an intangible cultural heritage and a treasure? What is the reason for them being torn down?
Yeah, that's the point. For Japanese people, I think residential house. All time, Japanese typical style of a folk house is very deep eave, and inside is dark, and wall is very thin with a shoji, a screen with a paper, and so many people, especially elderly people, their memory is old house is uncomfortable to live. So modern house, like a westernized house, is more comfortable and clean and bright and easy to live. So they they don't want to use this old folk house, old residential house. So if chance, they want to be built. That's number one. And number two is a property in Japan. Property equal not house. Property equal the land. So if Western people, world, they are selling the house itself. House has a value, and but in Japan, land is valuable. So if they want to sell the property, if there's a someone's residential house, they want to clean up, clean,
Mm.
turn down. Otherwise, value of the land is going down. So yeah, I think there are many reasons because Japanese people doesn't care so much about old folk house Kominka.
Tell me about the community, though, of people who do, and how large is that from your observation, both from uh, the 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 consumers or the people who come to you. How big is that community, and how big is the community of carpenters and designers and artists involved in home and construction and building are involved in the work that you do? So I'm just kind of trying to get an understand of what is the size of the team for Team Kominka. Like, how big is that team within Japan?
Mm. Do you want me to answer? Okay, I think I don't think we can give exact numbers, at least not at this time. But I think there's sort of a general kind of Team Japan, Team Kominka Japan, and then that's made up of, as I think you can imagine, perhaps, various groups such as Japan Kominka Association, such as other nonprofit groups or nonprofit NPO organizations that are working to preserve and protect Kominka. And then also another, I think, quite growing group is a group of people that are maybe culturally diverse, people that have either, like myself, come to Japan, or people that are maybe outside Japan but have a strong interest in Kominka. That group, of course, I think is really quite small. Um, the one organization that we're very involved in is Kominka Japan, which is a nonprofit or an NPO. Our NPO status is pending at the moment. We're becoming an NPO. This group, I think, started probably about maybe 12 years ago or so, but it's only been in the past couple years that it's really come into its own. And now I think has maybe just right around in terms of its Facebook. It's a private Facebook group. Has maybe about 4,000 members.
Oh, okay.
The majority, it's an English language group. Of course, people also sometimes write, post in Japanese as well, and that's very welcome. But it's primarily an English language group. And the majority of people that are members are here in Japan. That's probably about maybe, I would say maybe 90%. And then after that, United States has the next largest membership, I think, is the United States, and then from there various countries, and I'm very happy to talk about some of the activities that group, Kominka Japan, carries out, if you like. Other groups, such as the group that we, together with the lovely people at Toda Comten, a design build company with a very, very, very long history of advocating and working very tirelessly for the preservation of these old buildings, that we, together with the Todas, started about 3 years ago, also with my brother in the United States. We're also active in various ways in preservation efforts. And of course, both Kominka Japan and Kominka Collective, and also Japan Kominka Association, those are groups that we're very, very closely involved with. So, if you'd like us to talk about any of those initiatives that any of those groups are carrying out, we'd be, of course, happy to do so.
Yeah, I would love to. I'd like to just, before we get to that, though, I just want to make sure to kind of, so we all understand, it's a relatively small community of
Oh, yes.
of people who have this genuine interest of
Yes.
preserving this and saving
Yes.
these beautiful buildings. However, there is, and it would seem that there is a community of people around the world, not just in Japan, but throughout, I would imagine, Europe and the United States, who are also offering their support. Much like myself, I'm very interested in this, as you know, but it's not as big as a lot of people would imagine when we start off this discussion. And I would say that both yourself and Toda-san, you're really at the tip of the spear here with a small group of people in trying to save these 800,000 buildings, or estimated thereabout. Would you agree?
I would agree. I wouldn't give us. I would give the Todas, of course, a lot of credit, because
Sure.
they've been working tirelessly for 20 or more years, and they come from a long line of traditional Japanese builders, and now they're architects as well. And also, it is a very small community. It's a tight knit but very warm and welcoming community. Uh, and it's a community where I think um, uh, people know each other, and along with, of course, the Todas, and then other people who are part of the Japan Kominka Association, such as its leader Inoue-san and Tsurutani-san and some other people. There's some people in Japan who are just really truly legends, and I'm sure people know their names. Alex Kerr is one of these people. I think 50 years ago or so. He's very youthful looking, so it's hard to believe that it was 50 years ago or so, but I think it is. When he was a very young man, he saved a kominka in Shikoku, which is called Chiori. And then from there, he went on to preserve other kominka in that local area, very, very, very rural area, as well as kominka throughout Japan, Kyoto, and then also there's Asby Brown, and both Alex Kerr and Asby Brown are internationally acclaimed experts, authors. They're just have a wealth of knowledge and experience. And then also, of course, there's Yoshihiro Takishita, who, together with his adopted father, John Roderick, and again, this is maybe 50 years ago or so, which is, also, kind of amazing that it's that long ago, because he's a very, very youthful, very vital kind of person. And Takishita-san is still just really, really, along with Asby Brown and Alex Kerr, really at the forefront of, preservation efforts. I think in Takishita-san's case, there was a Comenga in Gifu Prefecture near his hometown, I believe, that was going to be destroyed because a dam was going to be built. And he and John Roderick and other people, of course, were helping them, relocated it to Kamakura, where it is now. And since that time, I don't remember the exact number, but he's saved and relocated a number of Kominga. And Takishita-san, along with, of course, S.P. Brown and Alex Kerr, they're worldwide. They're known and respected, and in Japan, the admiration and respect and gratitude for them among this kind of Kominka architectural heritage community is just knows no bounds. And then another person I think is Carl Bang in Niigata, who is perhaps a little bit newer to the Kominka preservation efforts, but also is, someone that's very, very known and very respected in Japan. He's a German architect. And has not only renovated or brought, sort of brought back to life the Kominka that he lives in a really beautiful rural village in Niigata, but has done the same with other Kominka in that area, and it's sort of revitalized the village. So there are these
Wow.
amazing people at the forefront of this
Wow.
movement. Mm.
You said something interesting towards the beginning of our conversation, and I think sharing that the different people and the different directions that they're coming from and the work that they're doing would be a good segue into a very interesting part of all of this, which is the work and the need for this traditional Japanese carpentry to be retained. And is the work with the preservation of Kominka almost being sort of the springboard for that, or let's say the laboratory or the workshop for the retention of this wisdom and this knowledge of traditional Japanese carpentry, in both the deconstruction and reclaiming of these timbers and these artifacts, I might even say, that are found within the house, and then rebuilding and having these carpenters learn these methods by the reconstruction and redesign in traditional Japanese manner. I was wondering maybe if we could talk a little bit about that and how important that is.
Mm. Okay. Well, I'll say a bit and right, yeah, carpentry things.
We need a skilled carpenters technique to use these old beams or old material and revitalize
Revitalize, yeah.
the Kominka. Because recently, carpenters number is less and less. I heard, still now 80% of residential houses timber frame, wood house, but all joinery looks exactly same as before, but those are manufactured, processed at the a factory. We say pre-cut, and when the architect design, and they send the CAD data to the factory, and they use the NC machine, and make a shiguchi, joinery, and everything, and shipped to the building site. So carpenter or builder doesn't need to use the chisels or saw and kanna, planer at the site. They just use a Makita power tool, because we have to recent Japanese building code, we have to use the fast metal fasteners and bolt and nut and nail, we kind of Western style same. And so no chance to use carpentry's technique anymore. That means, we we don't want to say, but we don't need the traditional carpentry skill. But when we revitalize or renovate the old Kominka, of course, machinery, we can't use this machine. We need skilled carpenters, but less and less, and they are getting, old.
And then
That's another problem.
Right.
So a few company who has a skilled carpenter, they can handle, they can save this old house Kominka.
And also, if I might just add on to that, that if you walk into a sort of a traditional kind of prefab kind of house, these days, like the ones that we see going up all around our neighborhood, it's not going to look anything like what we would see excuse me, what we would see when we walk into a Kominka. We're not going to see those gorgeous big build beams. We're not going to see joinery. It's going to have a much more kind of sterile look. Of course, houses that have been maybe specifically designed to incorporate, that kind of Kominka or more traditional aspects, of course they're going to look more like what we might associate with the beautiful kind of traditional aspects, but with the exception of maybe a small tokonoma or maybe a few shoji doors and maybe a room that has some tatami. For the most part, we're not going to see all of the beautiful things, the Rama panels. We're just not going to see them, and we're not going to see, the artistry that these old buildings once were built with. We were talking. You were mentioning before about in taking down these houses that are going to be destroyed and then rebuilding them, if that then is sort of an opportunity to preserve the traditional building methods, and absolutely it is, and that's one of our aims. Our not-for-profit company, one of our aims is exactly that. That of course, we want to save these buildings because they are going to become wood chips. They're going to be incinerated. That's number one. Every beam we can save, every frame that we can save that's a small success, And I emphasize small because, of course, we and other people, of course, want to do more and more. And then also, in taking them down, whether it's taking down a building and then, we take it to the workshop. Each piece of wood is cleaned, which is amazing if you think it's a maybe 250-year-old structure, that every piece of wood is cleaned. And then there's some pre-assembly to make sure that the parts go back together as they should, because of course when the building's disassembled, things shift and change a bit. So they're generally not major repairs are needed, but some repairs are done. And then the structure, whether it's in Japan or abroad, the structure is packed into cartons and then shipping container and sent abroad, and then or relocated in Japan. And in so doing that, not only are we able to save the frame and the beautiful Kominka, but we're also able to save other materials such as the roof tiles, the beautiful ceramic roof tiles, the things that are inside the building, including old tansu and cabinets and things like that. We're able to save and then reuse all of those things, of course. And as you were just mentioning, then when the building's rebuilt, it's an opportunity to pass on those skills so that they do remain, they remain sort of culturally alive in Japan and also in other countries.
I know
And
that
not
some of the listeners are going to sort of, oh, well, that's too bad. But just to give some perspective, I want to share something that Kunito-san had shared with me when I was at a table. We were talking about this in Japan, and maybe you can go. You were sharing with me about a friend who owned a tool store, a large tool store, and you just they couldn't sell the tools. I mean, beautiful traditional Japanese woodworking tools that he couldn't even give them away anymore. Like, and you said, could you imagine a Home Depot filled with traditional Japanese planers and woodwork, all these different beautiful woodworking tools that are worth a fortune here in the United States? That I can imagine anybody listening who's a woodworker is just shaking their head right now in disbelief. But you were sharing with me that it's just not, you can't even give these tools away.
Mm. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Do you want to talk about that? About, I think probably what Kunito was referring to when you were having a conversation here in Japan, and maybe Toda-san may have mentioned this also, was that in this one rural area, what would have been once upon a time a very in-demand kind of the place that the carpenters would have gone to for their tools. There are the number of carpenters has decreased at such a rate. Also, these rural areas are being depopulated at such a rate that the demand for these tools, and again, this is in a rather rural area, is such that yes, there's this still existing enormous building that's filled with tools. And as I'm saying that, I'm reminded that, for example, we about a month ago we had a really wonderful experience that a group of 18 people from the Timber Framers Guild came and together we had, I think, maybe we called it a Kominka tour. I don't remember the name of it, but anyway, it was sort of started in Tokyo and then Kamakura and then Nara and Kyoto and Kobe, and we included the Minka Summit, and then to Shinshiro, which is our area. And we were, not at all surprised, of course, because we know that with, some Japanese people that are very involved in traditional carpentry. Of course, they are very, of course, great customers of Japanese traditional tool shops, but as we kind of expected, the Timber Frame Guild members, on this tour, were very enthusiastically visiting various tool shops, and I'm sure we're very good customers. So as you've said
Imagine.
before, there is a small number of people here in Japan. I don't mean to say that there's not that are very skilled, and many of these people are young, that are highly skilled Japanese traditional woodworkers and sakan plasterers and roof thatchers, but the number is tiny. And
Yeah.
those would be the people that would be customers at those tool shops. And yes, as you had discussed, yeah, there is a huge tool shop that doesn't have any customers in our area.
You were talking about the wood chipper and saying that some of these Kominka just go to the wood chipper, and just to so the listeners here understand what you're saying. Uh, In the one of the buildings that we visited, the Kominka was made of cypress. Is that accurate? It was a cypress wood, right?
Yes.
Cypress lives to on average about 600 years.
Mm.
And if it's a 300-year-old building, and let's just say it was a middle-aged cypress, it was 500 years when you're talking about a 900-year-old structure of wood that is just going to the wood chipper. And that's
Yes.
just, I mean, it's unthinkable. So
Yes.
let's move into some of the work that you're doing. And you've shared a little bit, but I'd like to know more. I'd like to sort of unpack your the work that you're doing right now and what we're going to be able to look forward to and what your goals are together.
Mm. Okay. Uh, I don't know if you can see, but Kunito's motioning over to me. Uh, uh, well, the work that we're doing right now is sort of twofold. One, because we're a not for profit company, one is the company aspect. And that involves when we of course they're not here with us, but this includes members of the Toda family, because we're all working on this together. That when there's a Kominka that's going to be torn down, we go and assess it, and if all or parts of it are still in good enough condition that they can be saved, then it's taken down and put into storage. That's one thing that's happening, and that's part of the company part of things. And then, if that Kominka can find a home in Japan, wonderful. And if it can find a home overseas, wonderful. And I just want to divert for just a moment. I
Sure.
promise I'll come back. One of the reasons we do not want to have anything to do with cultural appropriation, excuse me, if a Kominka is in a rural area or an urban area, and there's any chance that someone can move into it, that it can be renovated, that it can be maintained, that's where it belongs. It should not be taken down. But if it's going to be destroyed, then we want to save it.
That's a
And
very interesting point. Yeah. Yeah.
and related to that, then I think, some people might say, well, isn't that sort of wrong to be taking down Kominka? Actually, we haven't heard people say that, but we just imagine it could be, to take Kominka and send them outside of Japan. They belong, they should stay in Japan. They're, sort of Japanese, literally kind of Japanese property. And certainly, if a Kominka can stay in Japan, that's wonderful. But also, if a Kominka can be enjoyed and used as a public space, as a dojo, as perhaps a structure on a public Japanese garden, as a retreat center, as someone's home, as a studio, then we don't think it matters where in the world it is. And also, outside of Japan, the more awareness that people have of these incredible structures. Once you go into a Kominka, I think, and see the beam structure and see the wood and feel the history and touch the Kominka, you can't not fall deeply in love with them. It's simply impossible, I think.
I
So the
agree.
more and more
Yeah.
that people have that opportunity to see them and live with them, and spend time in these spaces, that we believe will then have sort of a positive, perhaps impact back here in Japan, is part of our hope. So that's certainly one of our aims. Um, and I'm kind of gotten lost here in my speaking about that. So if you want to give us perhaps a prompt for what else we
Sure.
might be talking
Sure.
about.
That was. I'm glad you did that, though, Andrea, because you allowed me to think a little bit about something that I hadn't, and that it is that cultural appropriation question, which I
Mm,
think is a relatively new question, but I think it is quite important. And the first thing that came to my mind was something very uniquely Japanese, like Aikido, right? And the founder of Aikido, Morie Ueshiba, or O Sensei, as the Aikidoka call him. I don't know the value that Aikido would have had if it didn't spread throughout the world. It
mm,
wouldn't have had the impact that its founder really wanted. And I wonder if this is something, I don't know if it's similar, but it's the first thing that came to my mind, which was, wow, that's a really interesting question. And I love how you handle that, which is, no, we want to find out if if it's going to be used, if someone wants to live in it first. That's the priority, rather than just going out and finding these and grabbing it because we have a buyer in Germany. It's not, this is not what we're talking about here. And if someone's thinking that, like, oh, so what they do is they find these great abandoned buildings, and then they sell them to someone who wants to open a tea shop in Berlin. That's
Right.
not what this is. So that was,
Right.
I'm glad you brought that point forward. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, and thank you for sort of reiterating it in a very clear way. I'm grateful to you. Exactly. If a building's not going to be destroyed, we would not touch it. Only buildings that are absolutely going to be destroyed. Um, and then sort of maybe following on a bit to, the nonprofit company, to the business aspect of it, of this, that if there is someone that says, for example, we'd like to have this style of Kominka, we're going to have maybe a contemplative retreat center somewhere or something like that. Uh, uh, and they are looking for something specific, and we would look, and then if we find that, yes, okay, here in Niigata, this building is going to be destroyed, then we would specifically, with someone in mind or an organization in mind, take it down, and it wouldn't go into storage. So there's sort of those two routes, but either route, it is only buildings that are going to be turned into wood chips, or just simply incinerated, that we're very, very keen to rescue. So that's the, and if I can, maybe can I say just a little bit more about the company aspect? One
Yes,
of our
absolutely.
aims, thank you. One of our aims in this project was to revitalize, as we've spoken about a little bit, so far, Japanese traditional building methods, and to give, for example, carpenters in our area in Shinchiro, opportunities not only to work in Japan, but also to go abroad and show people the work that they're doing. And we know that outside of Japan, maybe even more than inside Japan, perhaps, there's a really deep appreciation for Japanese traditional building skills and Japanese building arts. So we had that in mind initially, that, okay, if we're going to send a structure abroad to be rebuilt, then Japanese carpenters can go and be involved in the rebuilding. But we rather quickly realized that although other professionals can go, for example, to the United States for 3 months for business without needing to have a visa to work in the U.S. That doesn't apply to building. It doesn't apply to carpentry. So that put an into that particular direction that we were considering. But uh, we, over the past couple of years since we've started this project, we've been very, very fortunate to get to know a number of people, for example, in North America, who have skills and very deep interest in Japanese traditional woodworking and building methods. There's some really incredibly skilled people. And so, fortunately, we've been able to, sort of work together with them in reconstructing buildings in North America. And also, we found that, as we suspected, there's a huge interest, maybe particularly among younger carpenters. Who maybe have, a fairly deep awareness of Japanese carpentry,
Younger
woodworking,
carpenters within Japan or in North America?
North America,
Ah,
uh, who do have, that there's a more limited number of carpenters with incredible skills in North America, and I'm sure Europe as well. And But there's also many younger carpenters who maybe they haven't apprenticed in Japan. For example, maybe they've read some books, maybe they've gone to a workshop, but they're very keen to develop their skills. And so, those people also, we've been very, very fortunate to, sort of be able to. I don't know what the word is, but a community has kind of come together,
sure. To collaborate.
particularly on
Yeah.
the West Coast, but I think that that will also be growing, across maybe to the East Coast, and then maybe filling in between, in terms of North America. So that's been something that's been very, very exciting. And then what it's meant is that, okay, the Japanese carpenters can't go and have a visa to work on. Maybe they could for like a really large project, maybe something, at a museum or a Japanese garden. That might be possible. And I'm sure we'll be exploring that in the fairly near future. But on smaller projects, it's not possible. But what we can do is, for example, Toda Conten, the Toda Design Build Company, their traditional carpenters could go and advise, or together with us when we sometimes there's the not-for-profit company, so that's company work, but sort of on the other side of it, the kind of not-for-profit NPO like work. Everything is not-for-profit, but the NPO sort of, having workshops and seminars and, tours and those kinds of activities is the other side of what we're doing.
To introduce the Kominka,
Yes.
to introduce the Japanese traditional carpentry work.
Right, right, and give people of course, there's just some really amazing, as I've said a couple times, really amazing Japanese woodworkers in the U.S., and they do have they have workshops, and the very wonderful Timber Framers Guild. They have all kinds of opportunities for people to become and Kizurokai, and there's so many. There are quite a few different organizations that are helping to keep Japanese carpentry alive in North America and probably in Europe as well. But this is an opportunity for people to go abroad and be involved.
If someone wants to use or this Kominka in abroad, not Japan, we usually make we need a team, because we cannot go, as Andrea said, we cannot go and build in foreign country
because of visa problems.
Yeah, therefore we need and also building code and building method is different. So therefore we always make the team. Japan side, we have architect and designer of this, Kominka reforming and using, and we need the architect or designer in US, and also the engineer who can pass the building code in local, in US, and also
or Canada or Mexico.
And also we need a general contractor, and the builders. And so Kominka Collective, our services, we provide this connection between America, US overseas side, team and Japan side team, how to use, this timber frame or beams, or Kominka itself to use in abroad. Yeah, take a take a time, but
it's been, I think, on our part, because we're still quite a new organization, but we've had a very steep learning curve. For example, related to planning permission and things like that. But we have learned a lot with the help of many people who are generous expertise. Also, we've been fortunate to have some government funding from the Japanese government to carry out research on old wood that cannot be graded, and its use in buildings in, for example, the United States, and other types of research, and also just being hands-on. For example, on the U.S. side, so far my brother's been the contractor, and he has a deep knowledge of traditional Japanese building methods, and so literally hands-on sort of has come up with various know-how about, okay, this is the situation in Japan, and this is how things are done here in the US or Canada or, other places. And even just between municipalities, things are going to be different. How can we handle this? And we found ways that, some kind of know-how that then lets us really honor the traditional Japanese aesthetic and building style in another, a completely different setting.
If it's a kind of a monument for the museum or garden or something, just relocate. That's difficult, but not so difficult. But mostly our client, they are using for their residential house
or studio or retreat center, places that people are going to be staying in, not just looking at, but not sleeping in. So it makes planning permission different. So it's something that we've really had to get up to speed on.
Wow. I could imagine there's a whole lot of logistics involved when it comes to different woods and getting stuff to get into the country, into the United States, and the concerns that might come up with that. You said something very interesting. There are two things that I want to unpack a little bit. I also want to be sensitive of your time, but one is I think so our listeners understand, we're not just talking about deconstructing a building and then reconstructing it over here. There are other solutions and other resources that you, along with Toda-san, offer, such as if a building is very damaged and very weathered, you may only be able to salvage just a few pieces, and those are cleaned and put into the workshop and then meticulously stored. And those can be used for different projects, not necessarily the reconstruction of that Kominka. So there are deeper resources. I want the listeners just to understand than just finding a house and putting it rebuilding it somewhere else. That's not what this is. It's much more. It's you had mentioned the different staircases and the salvaging of different artifacts found in the house or on the property, and so on and so forth. I found that really fascinating, and I'll be including some in this on the video if you're listening to this. And if you want to hop over to YouTube and watch the video of this, I'll be displaying images of Toda-san's warehouse where we went through, and he showed me all of this. It was amazing. Kunito-san, could you talk a little bit about that process, though? Maybe how long does it take on average? And I know every project is going to be different because of size and location, but if you could give us kind of a ballpark, kind of an average time frame that it takes for one of these projects to deconstruct, and then take us through that life cycle of reclaiming the Kominka, and then putting everything into the database of each piece. And what is that's an awful lot of work, and I'm curious what that looks like.
You mean dismantling,
disassembling,
yeah,
dismantling,
and then storing and all that.
Before I explained, they don't have any nail and bolt and anything, so disassembly process depends on the size, but the usual residential house, it takes 2 or 3 days.
Oh, that's it.
Disassemble. I mean, numbering 1 day, and disassembling is 1 or 2 days.
Depends on the size.
Yeah,
of course.
Not so long time. Usually, if we want to preserve every material, wall and
ceiling panel,
every detail, to relocate the monument to museum or something, it takes a long time. But mainly we try to save the beams and the structure frames, so therefore takes not so long time.
But if I can add on to that, that one of the things that we would like to do is, even if they're not used in exactly the same way, to save as much of the material as we can. For example, the ceiling panels are sometimes, or not sometimes, they're almost always really quite beautiful. Really beautiful wood. And so they can be saved and maybe not used again as ceiling panels. They could be, but I think oftentimes people want the beautiful beam structure visible, so they may not want to put a ceiling back in. But they could be used as wainscoting, or they could be used in other ways. In the Minka that we sent over first, about 3 years ago or so, 4 years ago, to my brother's place, in the attic area, there were so many silkworm pallets. So we saved them because why not? There was space in the container, and sent them over. And he's now sort of at the more finishing stages of. He's been busy the last couple of years, so he hasn't had time to, ironically, finish rebuilding his own Kominka. But he's kind of excuse me, at that point now. And so even the wood from silkworm pallets will find their way somehow into the rebuilding of the structure. Also, if I can just comment that the way that a structure is rebuilt, there's, as you've just mentioned, I think, Adam, there's so much flexibility. It can be that there's loose beams. As you saw, there are so many loose beams, that the Todas have saved, and they're gorgeous. And so many other materials as well. So those can be incorporated into an existing or a new structure. And then also, the frames. But even within the frames, for example, there could be a frame, and then if somebody would like to have another story added to a Kominka once it's relocated, it could be that two beam structures are sent over and they're integrated. And then also the rooms inside the existing Minka. If the kitchen was here initially, it doesn't mean that needs to be a kitchen when it's redesigned and rebuilt. Things can move around. Even Minkas can be added. For example, if there's somebody wants a larger structure, or maybe kind of a U-shaped structure. So depending on what people would like to have, the interior can be, of course, completely, redesigned. Beam structures can be integrated. For example, I think the, really lovely Kominka that we visited together in Shinshiro, the one that the Todas use, sort of as their office space. That's actually to Kominka. The main frame is a lovely old building, a lovely old Kominka from Niigata that was just on its last legs. It was really close to being unusable, which is the case of many Kominka, in that area. When you walk around in the mountains in Niigata, you see so many Kominka that are vacant, many of which are no longer, some of which may be no longer usable, others of which are, probably, sort of at on their last legs. So anyway, this Kominka was old, on its last legs. They relocated it, and then into the design, they incorporated another Kominka from also a rural area, but a more local rural area. And so the third floor is that very dynamic beam structure, or maybe the second and third floor has that dynamic beam structure. So there's so much flexibility. And I don't know if maybe it cut off before I said this, but that also Minka can be joined together. So, if somebody would like kind of a U-shaped structure, there could be, a Minka, one Kominka, another Kominka, and another Kominka, or parts of a Kominka. So, for example, the building that my brother has, and I'll send you some images of it. That's not the whole Kominka. That's part of the Kominka, because he didn't want a 2,000 square foot structure. He wanted about maybe 800 square feet. So there's so much flexibility and creativity. Really, the sky's the limit in how these old materials and this really, just absolutely irreplaceable building style, and also, old beams, how they can be used and given a second life.
I have a follow-up video to this that I'm creating. It's wonderful. I've been working on it since I got back from Japan, but it's actually Kunito-san giving me a tour through the house that you're talking about. And Toda-san he's an artist. He's not a carpenter. He is an absolute, I mean, like, he is a Picasso. That is, we can talk about it and you can explain it, but it just doesn't, you have to see it. It is just wonderful. I'm curious, when you took us to the silk factory, the warehouse, was it a warehouse
Yes.
or? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a warehouse. Yeah, a kura.
It was a warehouse. Yeah.
In Japanese,
Yeah.
kura. Yeah.
A kura.
Yeah, kura.
A question came to me when you showed me there's a beam along the ridge and there was brushing that much like it seemed like much like maybe the tang of a sword, right? Where the master carpenter makes notes. And then you'd explain that there's a prayer on that. And that it really blew my mind. And did you know that is this something that you discovered along your journey here in learning about the Kominka? And then with that same question, I'm curious to know, what are some of the other discoveries that you've made and these treasures that you've unearthed on this journey with Kominka?
Many. When we, sometimes, when we dismantle the Kominka, in the hidden place, the carpenter write down his name, and there are many evidence we could find a long time ago, more than 200 years before, the carpenter, of course, not famous and local carpenter. He wrote down the date and,
and sometimes a message. And adding to this is, and I think we maybe talked about this when you were here in Japan, Adam, that sometimes, when we, and I say we doesn't really always include me, it's more the Todas and Kunito, go to these old buildings, these old Kominka, and they want to look and see what the beam structure above the ceiling panels are like. It's very, very, very possible, if not probable, that some of those beautiful, beautiful beam structures have not been seen since the house was built, 100, 200 years ago. In the case of, maybe families that were a little bit more well-to-do, they would have, ceiling panels in these beautiful homes, which then would mean that the lovely beam structure was out of view. And it also meant that a lighter color, depending on the wood, but a lighter color would be sort of preserved, because the cooking, the open fire, in that kind of maybe main room, the smoke wouldn't have reached the beam structure. And so I find it just, I think we all find it amazing to go into these old houses and have a sense that maybe this is the first time that this beam structure has been seen since it was built. I mean, it's not a guarantee, who knows, but, oftentimes they have to poke around before they can find a way up into that space. So unless there's maybe, sometimes people might have a little loft area or something for storing things, in which case, yes, maybe they have a ladder or they have a way up. Otherwise, it may have been kind of a long time since somebody's seen this.
During the dismantling time, many carpenters are enjoying because they found many evidence, and also chalk line.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They know, they make carpenter long time ago. They use this line for this, and any kind of technical found.
And tools, I think, aren't sometimes tools, occasionally a tool will be purposely left or something.
Yeah, I had that.
Oh, oh. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So I mean, these places are treasures because of the wood, because of the, because of the way that they're put together. No blueprint, no computers, of course. It's all the carpenter's skill in fitting together
Wow.
the joinery and making those judgments. So there's that element that they're treasures, and then there's also the sort of the treasures that are found within them. And I just want to mention that I've sometimes wondered, okay, when we go to visit a house and see, the owner said, it's going to be destroyed, but we're happy for you to, take it and have it rebuilt, maybe in another country. And I've wondered about the owner's feelings, do they
Hmm.
feel odd that their house might be rebuilt, for example, in Oregon, because that's where that's where
Especially
we
if it's been in their family for so long, I could imagine.
Right, right. But yes, exactly. But our experience so far and has always been that people say, yes, please, please, please. We want, if it's possible, we want the building saved, and if it can be enjoyed by people in another country, then that's absolutely wonderful. We're happy for people to, be able to live and to touch and, work and experience these, this particular structure that's been in our family. And people also are always very, very generous about when we're there looking at the building, telling us, of course, as you can imagine, about the history, to the extent they may not know all of the history, but the sort of the history of the house, and also artifacts in the house. I don't know if artifacts is the right word or not, but things in the house, they're very keen. They'll say, please take this as well, and if this can be used, please take all of these things. And if they can be used, then that's, we're really happy. And more often than not, we're also sent away with, just a box of things that they're not planning to, they've already
Wow.
moved. Yeah, maybe even 20, 30 years ago, they've moved to another house, and there's just things sitting around that are maybe not in terms of in a monetary sense, maybe not valuable, but they're interesting and they're lovely, and they have some
Sure.
historical value to that particular space. And so they're also keen for us to take away just sort of what might be considered kind of odds and ends, but they are in fact, they are in fact treasures.
Even things like the ridge ends on the roof that Kunito, you were showing me, or the corners of the roof, those beautiful, how they're sculpted with a design and just phenomenal. There's another thing, though, too, Andrea, that I want to mention. You'd said when you began deconstructing these that you'd learn sometimes you'd find a tool or you'd see you'd first person to see this wood since it had
Right.
been put together. But then Kunito-san sharing that they discovered that carpenters would learn these methods, like, oh wow, look at this. But then there was another thing too that you shared with me, and in Toda-san's in his warehouse was you could read these old pieces of wood and how the people lived in the house, from the fires stain and the different
Yes.
the living the years and the decades, even centuries of life staining and becoming part of, like, almost seasoning the wood. It was absolutely fascinating. It blew my mind. It was unbelievable. And then when you start to polish it and he cleans it down, it
Yes.
takes on its own unique life. It's really, really wonderful to see. Even to the bamboo, Kunito, that you showed me, those bamboo strips with the lines in them. Amazing.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, Kunito's asking me to elaborate on that a bit. And this ties back into, you were talking about Toda-san being an artist,
Yeah.
that he sees old things. For example, the bamboo that you're just talking about now, which is under the inside part of a thatched roof. And because it's been this kind of rope or cord has been wrapped around it, so that with years of the smoke coming up, making the bamboo darker, and also, as you just commented, the beautiful beams and everything also darker, unless there's a ceiling in place which blocks it. And then when a thatched roof kominka is torn down, which they are, um, uh, uh, then there's this beautiful bamboo that has this really lovely kind of almost a glow to it, in a sense, and parts of it where the rope has been wrapped around is lighter, and then the part that's had the smoke, the sort of the effect of the smoke over many years is darker. And so I think, you know, Toda-san looks at something like that or other old things
Yeah,
and knows.
he's enjoying how to use these things.
Yeah, but in really innovative ways, very practical ways. Like, for example, when we went into that relocated Kominka, which is the Toda-Komten office, and you saw in the entryway that he had wood, and then in between the pieces of wood, he had that old bamboo. Or upstairs on the second floor, I think you may remember, he had some, uh, I, this beautiful old curved wood that's
Yeah.
naturally curved because of the snow load. And so it's essentially a beam
I didn't know
where it
that.
was
That's
a beam, but he's using it more as kind of a railing. So it's a
Hmm.
railing that used to be an old beam, and because of the smoke, it's very deep, very dark, rich, kind of dark brown or almost even black color. And then he put, these bamboo pieces. We can send photos over for something that is just so incredibly unique. So, yeah, throughout any house that he's renovated or any structure, you can, as you commented, one can always see this just incredible creativity and wonderful use of these old materials. Otherwise, they would not be used, and yeah, that would just be such a shame. So,
Yeah. So I think we've as we sort of come to the end of this conversation, I think we've really learned a lot about what, I mean, if you didn't know already, you know now what Kominka are, the situation that you're answering, the call that you're answering to help preserve not just these buildings and not just these sort of these cultural treasures, but also the artistry itself and the design itself, and then how you go about doing that and what the process is. It's just absolutely fascinating to me, and I'm so happy and inspired, not just by your story, but to hopefully one day be a part of it. I have one more question, and then what I'd like you to do is share with me how any of our listeners or the people who are watching us on YouTube, how they can contact and support and be part of the work. But before you answer that, share with us one of your best successes so far, and what that story is.
Well, I think, and at the risk of sounding maybe a little bit cheesy,
Go for
and
it. Go for it.
I excel in cheesiness. I think any beam that's saved is a success. It's a small
Yeah.
success, but any beam that can be saved is a success. I think, if I may, and we have various projects that are at various stages, but I think the project I'd like to comment on that I think is a big success is the one in Oregon, in Eastern Oregon, and it's a retreat center owned by a really wonderful couple, Kiyomi Koike and Bill Oliver. And Kiyomi, as it works out, this is a bit of serendipity, and I notice a lot of serendipity in almost on a daily basis. I'm kind of amazed by the serendipity that seems to be a welcome part of this whole project. The
Mm.
serendipity is that Kiyomi-san lives just down the road from my brother. And that's maybe not serendipity because she heard that he's rebuilding a Kominga on his property. And she, at that time, had owned a Japanese tea company, ocha company, for many years, about 20 years, and was hoping to have kind of a tea room, a Kominka tea room built on her property as a place where people could go and have calm and kind of a sense of quiet in this gorgeous natural setting. And so that's what, together, with the Todas and us and my brother and Kyomi and Bill spent copious hours on Zoom creating a design. And that initial design, or that initial tea room, you can get the sense that there's more to come, or not tea room, but kind of, a beautiful small 200 square foot structure, was crafted by the Todas, and then in collaboration with my brother, using old beams and other old wood, including tatami and shoji and an old ladder, and various old reclaimed wood, and then also new materials. And what we did, it was a bit of an experiment, to say the least. We decided to make this kind of small structure here in Japan, kind of in a panel sort of way, so that then when it was sent to the site where it was reassembled and rebuilt, it was a matter of kind of doing the usual Kominka thing of putting the beams back together, the frame back together. But then also there were wall panels with US insulation. I should add that any buildings that are, sent over are, of course, built to U.S. building codes. So they have insulation and everything, all of that, and the heights are taller and whatnot. So anyway, that the first small structure was built, and in the process of planning
So
that,
you do like a pre-frame in the workshop. You pre-frame
yes,
and then you
yes,
deconstruct that and box it.
right. That always,
Yeah,
almost always happens. But we
yeah.
went a step further this time. And the Todas built, and again in collaboration with my brother, they designed and built wall panels that already then the insulation was put in. They were not plastered. We went back and forth about should we plaster in Japan or plaster in the US, upon arrival. We didn't plaster because we were worried the plaster might crack and then one would just have to replaster. So we didn't plaster, but everything, the windows, everything, old reclaimed kura door, everything was prepared here, and then made here, and then, as you said, disassembled, but on a rather grand scale because it was really disassembling the whole house, or small structure, and then packed and sent over. And then over the course of a few weeks, it was rebuilt there. During the planning of this, Kiyomi-san decided that she was going to sell her tea company, and she had retrained as a excuse me, as a life coach, and she's a very empathetic, just a truly generous, wonderful person, and also is a tea ceremony teacher. So this all sort of fits together. So they decided that they wanted to extend the building. So now on their property, they have this lovely kind of Kominka kit. It looks nothing like a kit, don't get me wrong, but it was, we took kind of a creative approach to how we, designed and built it. And now it's attached to a small Kominka that was disassembled. And then the work, the repair work and the washing and all of that was done in Japan and then sent over. And then last summer, the two sides were connected with a really beautiful entryway. So it's very organic. It doesn't look like, well, here's this one building and we're going to stick another building on it at all. We have images on our website, and Kiyomi, of course, has on her website as well. Zen House Kominka is the name of her lovely, lovely retreat center in a really stunningly beautiful part of Oregon. And if I sound like I'm kind of trying to be an advertisement for her, it's because I am, because it's just really a beautiful
It's
place.
unbelievable. And
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
yeah, if you're watching this, you're seeing photos of it right now, and the view and just everything about it is just it's spectacular. It really is an amazing job by the entire team.
We'll
So
have also, if I may,
yeah,
we'll have some professional, because it's only just maybe 3 weeks ago been completed, the interior. So we'll have some professional, really beautiful photographs taken, and then hopefully rather soon have those available on her website, and then of course on our website as well. May I mention one more thing? I'm sorry.
You can mention as many as you want.
But he's nudging me to stop talking, but I'm ignoring him, as I do. You were mentioning about how people can be involved, and one way is we have some events. So far, we've only had events in Oregon, and I think I'm from Oregon, and my brother's in Oregon, so it's kind of natural that, so far that's been, as well as California and Jamaica and East Coast, other places. But so far, completed buildings are in Oregon. That we've had every year for the past couple of years, what we've called Kominka Festival, so Oregon Kominka Festival, and we've been really, really delighted that so many people have come and participated, and it's been a little bit like the Minka Summit, that a group that we're close to, Kominga Japan, we're very involved in the planning of that as well, holds every year, where there's presentations, panel discussions, writers' talks, workshops, demonstrations, an area where people can come and buy things, really wonderful things, and also participate in tea ceremony and, ikebana, and some of the things that I think, you've also been involved with, at your dojo as well. So, if people are in the local area, we welcome them. And we've also had some online events, and we'll keep you posted and everything about those online events, because of course they're more accessible to a range of people. So that's one way, just in terms of maybe learning more and getting a little bit more, involved in how one can preserve Kominga. And then, of course, the other way is, if you're people that are interested, get in touch. We'd love to talk with people about, the many ways and the very flexible and creative ways that they can incorporate Kominga and these old materials into their lives.
I think just learning about it right now is such an amazing start. This has been an incredible time. And I, again, I want to thank both of you for taking me around and showing and teaching me and introducing me to this world. It's really exciting. It is a bit of a bittersweet thing, though, I can imagine, because of seeing these houses and these beautiful buildings go. But I think that collectively, through the work that you're doing, through the team of people that you shared with us that are involved in it, and through more education and more conversations like we're having, maybe so much of this can be saved and preserved and shared and gifted on to the next generation. So thank you so much for this time, both of you, Kunito-san and Andrea. I really appreciate it. And thank you for spending this time with me today on our podcast.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much.